if you really want to find that look and that style that sets you apart, you need to explore, right? You need time to like really dig into like the brand, the colors, everything. And I think nowadays it's so much like the fast consumption, and it's just about quantity, not quality. Like you really want that time for explore, and I think you can see from people's works and studios, like you can kind of sense when they had that time for R&D, and then when they were just like, here's some stuff, do it, and you kind of just have to get it to the finish line.
Welcome to the Styleframe Saturdays podcast, the podcast dedicated to ideation, visual storytelling, and concept development as it pertains to an animated production. We'll be breaking down the brief of our guests' favorite style frames, and we'll also get a glimpse into the inspiration and workflows behind their frame of choice as well. That was Nidia Dias, a freelance creative director and designer based out of Portugal. She's worked with several big-name brands like Microsoft, Google, and Meta. And today she's sharing one of her personal favorites from one of these iconic branded projects. So let's dive into it. Hey, Nidia, thank you so much for coming on the show today. How's everything going?
Good, thanks for inviting me. It's a good summertime, so always great.
Yeah, right? No, this is the perfect time of year. Weather's good. It's always a good time in the summer when you're able to, do some creative stuff and enjoy the season for sure. Well, I'm sure our audience is pretty familiar with your work. I know I've been familiar with it for quite some time now. But for those who aren't familiar with your work, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the field of motion design?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Nidia Dias. So I'm creative director at the time, but I started as a graphic designer, really, when I was studying was graphic design. Started seeing a lot of stuff in motion, got in love with that. And once I got in love with that, I really wanted to learn motion graphics. So I went to Hyper Island in Sweden to learn motion graphics, and again, really got in love with it. And so I got an internship in London at a studio called Mainframe. And there I was just a generalist, really, just learning the ropes of the industry and everything. And as I got more confident and understanding better what motion design was and what I was doing, I was trying everything. And then I really realized that what I love more was the design side and the style frames. And I started discovering that that you could become an art director. So I really tried to push myself to that. So from there, I just went to different places like Analog Studios and Future Deluxe in London as well, where I went from senior designer to art director at Analog, and then freelance, and then got an opportunity to go to Tendril in Canada, and I thought it was fun to try somewhere else to live. So I moved there. And then since I left Tendril, I've been freelancing remote from Portugal, from where I'm from. And I've been doing a bit of, I won't say a bit of everything, but within the design, I'm mainly doing now creative direction, but sometimes I just accept some jobs for directing. Sometimes I just want to design, so I accept some jobs for designing. So it's been nice to kind of shuffle between these different roles within the last years.
Very cool. And so I think you may have said this, but correct me if I'm wrong. So prior to going off on your own and freelancing, you were staff at some of these other places like Tendril, and you were on site with them, or were you remote at that time too?
With Tendril, I was on site, so I had the opportunity to go to Canada. So I did the whole visa process and all the stuff, and I stayed there a year.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, very cool. So how is it now, having been staff at some places and being remote, how are you liking the remote setup?
I really like that. I know there's always some people love the being in studio, some people love the remote. I think for me, potentially it would be like a hybrid situation. But I like working from home because it means I can adjust my schedule. I do have a son, so it's easier to manage things here and not have the commute and all the stuff. Yeah, it's been good. I think I've been having recurring projects, which is great, but it also allows me to, as a freelance, to, want to take some time off to do personal projects or things like that. Like it gives me more of that opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of parents can agree with you that the hybrid and sort of remote opportunities really help with spending some time with the little ones as well. So can totally understand that for sure. Well, you mentioned that you really fell in love with the style frame and design aspect of the motion design landscape. So, I'd love to chat about the frame that you're sharing with us today. Could you tell us a little bit about it and sort of the larger project that it was part of too?
Yeah, it's actually an old all Styleframe, I was debating which one to choose, and it's really hard. You made it quite impossible, but I was trying to figure out like what could be interesting to talk, and I think that project, that was a project that I did at Tendril when I was art director there, that was for Microsoft. It had a very big impact in my career, so that's why I also chose it. So we were doing the whole visual language promotional for Microsoft Office 365, which now we are used to see all the glass and things like that. But at the time, it was the first time that they were really, taking the plunge into 3D. So it was a very big project for Microsoft and even for us and for me at Tendril. You also had live action, so I also had to think about like how to incorporate live action shots with the 3D shots. There was a lot to explain what changed in the UI and things like that. How can we explain that in a nice 3D way? So the style frame that I chose is one that didn't end up being used. But I chose it because it was still one of the times that you would do stuff in 3D and still do Photoshop on top. Nowadays, I do a lot of just straight from 3D and making sure that everything works within the 3D. But at the time I would say you still kind of allowed to, like you'd be like, we'll figure out later how to do this in 3D. So that's one of the shots where one of the parts about the project was collaboration. And a big thing about our behind thinking for the project that each user is assigned a color. So in the collaboration, you would have like the gradients kind of blending in those colors because you're collaborating. So you'd have these little, it's not like the little things from the users, the different colors, and then when they blend in with the shadows, they would just blend, right, and create like this beautiful gradient. So that was one of the approaches. We ended up changing it because it was too abstract, like that whole idea of the thing, which I understand for the first video as well for them, like it had to be more in line and more straight to the point. And we ended up, we had like 6 titles initially that were supposed to have like title cards, but then it was just too much. You kept on breaking the flow of the video. So we ended up cutting them, I think, to 3. So we ended up actually combining collaboration with another one. But it's still like one of the style frames I really like because it's kind of like clean, but it still has that like nice gradient and colors. So
yeah, no, it's beautiful. And I think you guys were definitely the first to pioneer this whole sort of abstract, glassy look, like really focusing sort of like the material design aspect, coming out in each of these sort of like new applications, really using in an abstract sort of visual language to talk about like UI. I think you have even said in some other interviews that you've done about this piece in particular too, that, Tendril had, or Microsoft had kind of said, maybe we don't want to just do like a pure UI or UX explainer video. And so that maybe had inspired some of this sort of abstract material stuff too. And, you guys were trendsetters for sure, because you're definitely seeing it everywhere nowadays.
yeah, definitely. I think that's why I still love this frame. Is that it was like it was very much a beginning thing, and I think it's always hard to like be a trendsetter as much as we always try to have like the coolest thing. So yeah, for me, it's still cool to see these kind of frames from that project that we done still being referenced in a lot of like briefs and things like that. So yeah, like I said, I think as I was thinking back, it did felt like one of the nicest projects to go back to in terms of style frames because it was such a defining moment for me as well. And like I said, also because I did a lot of Photoshop on it, and it's just interesting how things evolve to the fact that now everything kind of has to kind of in a way come ready from 3D as a style frame because you're expected to then continue animating it and things like that. And in the past was much more forgiving to like do Photoshop. Even before that one, I did a lot of Photoshop on top of the 3D and mixing a lot of different things. And the more as years go by, I try to do everything from one scene and then making sure that it comes out good. So just also need to go back and think about those things.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I know I don't know if guilty would be the right word to use in this instance, but like, I'm definitely still one of those people that, when I jump on the box and have to do a little bit of style framing, there's definitely a little Photoshop aspect in there. And so definitely following the tune of like, okay, well, we'll figure this out further down the line. But no, in terms of optimization and, getting stuff ready for the next phase. The tools have evolved so much to the point where you can do that now, pretty flawlessly. So yeah, I can see why, just sort of staying in the native 3D software sort of cranking these out has sort of been your ideal workflow for now as well. But, going back to kind of the whole visual language aspect of this whole thing, like I'd love to like talk about it a little bit about the creative brief, if you don't mind. What inspired sort of this sort of glassy sort of style and direction that you guys took? Was there anything in the creative brief that sort of like, pointed to that? Or was that just something that as you guys were sort of building out the sort of exploration aspect of this that you sort of stumbled upon?
That's a great question. I think that part of it came from the brief because Microsoft was changing to this kind of what they call the Fluent Design. So imagine like Google has material design, things like so. Microsoft was creating like a whole language, right? Trying to unify everything. So they had this Fluent Design, and then they talked about what they call, I think, is acrylic, if I remember correctly. So it's like this idea of being kind of transparent, the windows and tabs whenever you're moving them on your computer. So they already had that, but there was no like visual 3D language. So we had a lot of exploration. And I think the cool thing about this project as well is that there was a lot of weeks of R&D, really, because there was no, guide from Microsoft as a brand, like, oh, we usually do this, right? And this is how we approach. It's like they still didn't know. So we had a lot of like early explorations of how to put the UI in 3D, and like are we destroying it, not deconstructing it too much, or is this still fine? Can people still understand? And obviously we have to think that we have people like us watching the videos, but then we also have this big community of people that use Microsoft Offices, right? So it had to be a good balance between, like I said, the abstract, which at some point we went too far, like the frame that I did, and then paring it back a bit to be a bit more easy to understand. So a lot of the explorations initially was really like UI, and like I always, like I said, I do come from a graphical design background, so a lot of the connotations for the style for this project was graphic design. How would we present like a perspective on the UI in 3D, and like grids, like because there was a lot about also like how in the past, apparently, like if you open Excel and PowerPoint next to each other, things wouldn't align if you put them side by side. Like they weren't built as a whole. All the apps were built with this like base behind it, kind of almost like Excel did its own thing, PowerPoint did this thing, and then they were finally unifying everything in terms of design. So that was like a bigger thing to talk about.
Sure.
So besides all of those, collaboration and AI and all the stuff that you're using, there was this big thing overall. There was like changing all the UI icons, the UI grid, the logos of each app and all the stuff. And I think that was like the biggest inspiration really, was like, how would you present this in a graphic design? And when you do see those branding booklets and all the stuff, you have always the mock-ups and how the brand gets applied in different things. So that was also like kind of what we were using as an inspiration is, like I always like those mock-ups. It's like, how do you do it? There's always the perspective, there's always the isometric thing, and like really playing with that initially. So that was the early point, and like figuring out paper and glass, can we bridge them, make it a bit more tactile, because the reason we end up being in the live action, about that Microsoft wanted the live action was always the humane side of it, right? They didn't just want to be something just, pure 3D. So we're also trying to bring that in the way that we were doing the style frames. Can we bring some humanity to it? And some parts of it was the lighting as well, bringing it a bit like you have like some nicer shadows, not just very 3D shadows. So we were really trying to make it look like there's a window outside that's kind of shining in those lights and things like that. So that was part of the process as well, like not just the glass look, but like even the lighting and everything. We're really exploring, from A to B, what can we do?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I'm so happy you touched on the live action aspect of this project too, because, you've provided some really great sort of R&D pieces for how you sort of got to this sort of like finalized frame for the collaboration, I guess, icon, if you will, or language. But you also have this sort of script breakdown of like, how the live action is going to play out. And now hearing you talking about, how you're sort of marrying this material design and exploration to the live action. I was very curious to know whether or not the live action was even informing some of your design decisions. And it sounds like maybe to an extent it was. So like playing off of that humanity aspect that you were talking about a little bit. I mean, like, was there anything about the live action that played into some of the style and direction other than sort of like the lighting? Or was it just really like, okay, like we just want to really bring in like some element of realism to this too, even though it's abstract?
Yeah, I think it was both, because since we were cutting, live action and in between 3D, we really wanted to make it look like a cohesive piece, right? Like that they felt part of the same world. But there was a lot of stuff for the story. Like, one of the things we had to talk about was speed, how fast things were. And then, okay, how do we represent that? So then we have to be like, okay, in the live action, if she presses a button in the mouse, by the time that she takes it off, that's something that really happened, to show how fast that was. So there was a lot of stuff that, so that shot list that I gave you is like, I really needed specific things to like make sense with the 3D, right? Like the storytelling. So, the clicking of the mouse, I really had to have a shot of that. So I had to like really plan. And then we did like this very, very crude animatic with the people, just to be like what, and also because we are using the Microsoft devices, right? Each one of them had like something that was interesting. So we had, I think it's called Studio, the big one. And at the time you could have it almost like a tablet. So we were like, okay, the best way to showcase it is having like a top-down shot, so planning those to like see really that you can change it from being a tablet to, being normal. So that was like the beginning of the shot. And then, I was like, okay, I need live action, because we're going to also put some of the UI in it, because obviously some things will reanimate the clicking, because that at the time of this filming, the UI wasn't out. So it's not that we can just, go to a dummy, like to the website and create like a document that we didn't have that at the time. So we had to animate those as well, so we could then add it on it. And then, like typing, things like just, those in between fillers. So it's not just, here and there, the animation. And then, we had like the laptop, you could, it was touch screen. So we were like, okay, they want us to show something from the laptop. It's touch screen. Let's have him like on Word scrolling up and seeing stuff. So like I had a shot of like a list of all the shots that were important. So from the shots I have, all of them I need to use to have for the thing. And then this is the nice halves if we have time to film. So we were like planning it to them. I wouldn't say to the last minute, but it's like through the day I had like a list, and it's like, okay, we got this shot, we got this one, we got this, making sure that I had all of the small ones that made sense for the story to flow for all the collaboration, because collaboration is all about the girl is doing one thing and then the guy is doing it in the same document, right? So we needed to have something live action that kind of worked with that and things like that. So if there's parts that show on 3D typing, so we need to have him or her typing, so it makes sense. So a lot of the things I had to think beforehand, and it was quite cool for me to do that, because I also used like art directing and things like that for 3D, but not really live action. So having to think of like, oh, we need this, and I can't screw it up because I only have one day to film it. So it was interesting. But going back to like the influences, like the colors on the live action are also connected to the 3D. So for example,
Right.
The girl, her environment, let's call it like that, was all like the tones of like orange and neutral tones. So that was like because of PowerPoint, and then the guy was more like blues because it was like the blues from Word. So we're trying to also like play with that kind of like brand colors, and not like here's all branded and you have like things from Microsoft all around, but it's just like finding those colors that we're using for the main apps, which is PowerPoint and Word in a way, and using those to influence what we're putting around the environments.
Very cool. Yeah. No, I mean, you can, when you break it down like that, you can really see all those elements in play, and not just the style frame that you've chosen to share, but the piece overall too. I mean, you see the brand colors, you see, the story is very clear. It's a collaboration, using the, fancy new sort of like suite of services and everything. But I'd love to go back a little bit back to the fact that, you had mentioned that you were a director on this project. So kind of a two-part question, actually. Were you on set when they were doing the live action stuff, or were you just sort of like a 3D director in a sense?
I was on set. We did have obviously some live action director, because no way I'm going to talk with the DOP and all this stuff. So it's like I would tell them what I wanted, right? And they would be the ones directing the live action. And then, with the set designer, you'll be like, oh, is this good? So I'll be there being like helping. So it was pretty cool to have that experience, like still feel like I'm almost directing the live action, because there was like this really good partnership with us. But yeah, I was there like early on, making sure that everything is good, and like that we had all the things. And I remember them showing me as well, which like all the accessories to put on the desk, and I was like, oh, can I take them home? They're super cool. Like having that whole experience, and like even with the actors, like how they are they like, should we do another shot? Like they're asking me, are you happy with this shot? Do you want? And I was like, there was a lot of pressure to like, are we good? Do I need more shots? So yeah, definitely was like a really good experience. And again, that's why I chose this frame, because there was so much happening right for the whole project, that it just like, I think it made me grow as an art director and as a director. And till this day, still something that I go back to, reminding like how the process went and things like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, hearing you speak about it, it kind of sounds like, in a way, symbolically, the piece, is talking about the literal collaboration of the tools, but having pushed you in this direction of director, you're doing a whole bunch of collaboration now, dealing with all sorts of teams, and really kind of bringing this together from a live action to a 3D to a graphical design aspect. So I can see why you chose it. It's a pretty monumental moment, now taking you sort of in this creative direction in your career, for sure. One of the other things I wanted to ask, though, too, so knowing that you were on set, sort of, pulling together all the necessary elements you needed for sort of the post aspect of this project, were you involved in like sort of like the beginning phases of sort of like the story that they put together, in terms of like, like the storyboards or shot list that they created? Or were you sort of brought in at a point when they kind of had the story more or less finalized, but you came in from a sort of 3D or directive storytelling perspective and saying like, okay, well, in terms of how I want to tell the story, I need this and that, and so on and so forth?
No, yeah, I was there from the beginning. I had the help of Shande and Chris from Tendril, the creative directors there, and partners. So they were obviously helped me through all of this. But yeah, like all of them, we started off with first just like normal storyboard artists, hiring a storyboard artist just to make some quick sketches for like what we could do in terms of like the live action. But then, yeah, everything like story wise, even how we go from one to the other. Yeah, I was there from the very beginning, figuring out like I said, initially there was a lot of like just those early style frames of like the UI, like just figuring out what worked or not. Because even from the Microsoft side with Nandikose, there was a lot of like, these are things that we like, doesn't per se means that that's the direction we need to go. So there was options where we were exploring having the apps as like environments themselves in 3D, but that felt too much. Then we reduced. So at the beginning there was a lot of like just exploring, and then once we kind of find that language, then it was like, okay, now let's make a story out of this. And yeah, I really enjoy like figuring out those steps, like how the story goes and how it flows. And yeah, like that shot list we did, we actually did an animatic in 3D, so to see like timings as well, or is it too long? Right. Can we have all of these many shots? So we were like planning all of that while at simultaneously animating and editing stuff, and style frames and things like that. So definitely there from the beginning. But it was just like, we knew there was what we call like the story beats, like collaboration, speed, and then it was about like, how do we tell them and how do we flow from one to the other. Obviously there was those breaks with the symbols, but a lot of it still had to flow from one thing to the other. And the live action there helped, obviously, because you do cut to the live action and something happens, and then you go back to the 3D and you see that continuation of like that action being done in 3D with something. But it was still like, all of these moments, and even like the fact that it's a girl, it's a guy, where they're supposed to collaborate, but we don't want them in the same space. Like they should feel like they're in different countries. Like there was so much behind thinking to every single thing. So I think it was like putting those things into the story, like really was really something that I appreciate the process, really.
Yeah, no, I'll bet. And it's really cool to hear. I think this is the first time I'm kind of hearing somebody actually sort of talk out loud about sort of their storytelling process, in terms of live action and 3D. It's really cool to hear for you guys and for yourself as the creative director on this, that the sort of exploratory phase and the R&D portion of, the early style frame developments, or, even, specific shots that you wanted to capture, that was informing the actual story that you then sort of laid out, in a cohesive, sort of concise storyboard or shot list, or whatever you guys ended up using. I feel like I hear quite the opposite from time to time, where people are like, okay, we need this, and then we do this. Okay, now we bring it into production and post, and so on and so forth. So it's really cool to hear that for you guys, especially you as the director, we're really sort of like, well, let's explore quite a bit, because we can afford to do that, and let that inform the story. So I think that that's just like a really cool thing about this project as well.
Yeah, I think we're lucky, to be honest. Like, not always you get that R&D time, and that time to like sit down and really like, go back and forth to a lot of this. I'm assuming, again, like, because it was their first kind of big free video in 3D, that they also probably wanted it to be right, which was great for us. Because obviously, like you said, that ended up informing every video that was done by them. We did another one right after this one, and then Tangel kept on doing more videos, and there's way more studios doing a lot of other videos for Microsoft. The aesthetics has evolved from what we've done, but you can still see connotations of what was done initially. So yeah, I think was really interesting, the whole thing. And like I said, I think the fact that we had that R&D phase it was lucky. I mean, we were allowed to have that, but I don't think a lot of times we do have, and I miss that sometimes. Nowadays is cool, let's start, and it's like, no, like if you really want to find that look and that style that sets you apart, you need to explore, right? You need time to like really dig into like the brand, the colors, everything. And I think nowadays is so much like the fast consumption, right? Yes. We need something for Instagram, we need something for this, and it's just about quantity, not quality. Sure. Which sometimes is sad. Like, you really want that time for explore, and I think you can see from people's works and studios, like you can kind of sense when they had that time for R&D, and then when they were just like, here's some stuff, do it, and you kind of just have to get it to the finish line.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I couldn't agree more on that. Yeah, and I'd be very curious to see now that the sort of look and aesthetic has been established, for a lot of Microsoft stuff by you guys, like if that sort of same exploratory phase in terms of duration is the same now. I'm sure it's not. Like, they've sort of established a look, that they're probably going to go with for some time now. But you're absolutely right. I feel like you can actually see that in pieces from, brands or studios that, they definitely had quite a bit of time to work on this, versus like, this needed to get out the door like ASAP or whatever. But very cool to hear that that whole phase really informed sort of the storytelling process for you guys, and the overall sort of look and aesthetic for the piece as well. One of the other questions I had for you too, so earlier you had said that, the sort of translucency of the new sort of UI that was coming out for the suite of applications kind of informed some of the material design look of the piece too. You've also done a couple of quick tips online, which are amazing, by the way. If you haven't checked them out, everyone should really go check them out on Nidia's YouTube channel. But you've had some quick tips that you've put out that have sort of discussed how you technically sort of approach these shots. So I was just wondering, for this particular style frame, if you'd be able to sort of break down sort of your technical approach to this as well.
Yeah, I was going through like my Dropbox trying to find the Photoshop file for this, and funny enough, I had all the other style frames with the Photoshop, and this was the only folder that was empty. And I was like, of course, it is the only one that is empty.
Always happens.
But always, the one that you need, you never find them. But I'm not proud of how it looks, the render, and I gave you that frame, what I call the stable collaboration beginning. How the frame started. It's looking now, I was like, what was this? The colors, everything was just a mess. But at the time, I mean, I wouldn't say that I've changed much, but one thing that is obviously like, when you look at the quick tips, it feels like I know what I'm doing, which is in a certain extent I do, but that's because I had a lot of fails and then I found that technique, right? With this frame was the same. Like, I really like exploring, and a lot of times what I love about putting back in Photoshop is instead of me spending a lot of time in 3D, being like, let's try this color, let's try this, let's adjust this, I can just hop into Photoshop and then just start like hue saturation, change values and all this stuff, and quickly start to like find something. So again, this was 6 years ago, so I may not remember it correctly, but I'm pretty sure I render it and I render some passes like for the shadows. I went on Photoshop, I hue saturated all of those colors because they look nothing like the final one. And then a lot of it was about blurring and like warping the what was on the floor, because what I was trying to do at the time was I really want them to blend, right? I wanted the colors to feel seamless in the floor, and I wasn't getting that in 3D. So I was like, I'll just go in Photoshop and I'll just like smudge them and all that stuff. So I think I did a combination of blurring, like a lot of different layers, obviously, once I found the colors. And then I'm pretty sure I used the smudge tool to like, just because there's like a nicer combination of them in the Styleframe versus, the original one where they're just like going down very, with the lights, you can see where the light comes so easily on the original frame. But yeah, I really wanted to show like the beginning because my thought process sometimes is crazy. And like I said, it was a lot of R&D. And I was very much into if they liked it, I'll figure out how to do this later. I really just wanted to get the concept across, right? Rather than like actually finding the technique. And that's what I think with the style frames that I love is really finding, that idea, right? That style. Because a lot of times some things can be a bit more complex to do it in 3D, but if I would spend a lot of time imagine that style frame, the final one, it didn't end up being chosen. So I would probably lose like 2-3 days to do that style frame from 3D. Now I did this really quickly, like all of those symbols, I shared the symbols with you that we're exploring. And all of those I did them in 1 day at the time, because it was like, I just wanted to be like, what can we do? Is this what the client is expecting? And like some of them is just like the single line ribbon. I just twisted a line. I was trying to really be like, okay, speed, blur. So I was like trying to really just play that kind of game of like, what can I associate with this? And the app in icon things, like they used a grid, the 32 by 32 for all the to create all the icons. So that was it. And then the one for the app icons, the idea was that you're kind of peeling and revealing a new one, because that was the whole thing about this, is revealing the new logos as well. So I was really just going really fast and trying to find like something for them, but also more as a starting point of conversation with the client, rather than this is like the symbols that we're going to use. So really was all about being fast and just, sketching out those ideas. I'm not great at drawing. I'm terrible. So my way of doing is 3D Photoshop on top, and even if I'm supposed to do storyboards, I'll just probably do them in either very badly for myself, or I'll just go on 3D, put the things in, and probably render them as lines. It's like, here, look, storyboard. So I think as each person kind of finds their way of communicating, and mine was like, okay, I'll batch a few things out, change things on Photoshop, adjust it, and then I can have a conversation with the client and see, is this something like that? Because in my head, it's like, then if he likes it, then I know we're in the right path, and then I can, continue exploring it. And, we had an amazing team, obviously, with us. It's not just me working on all of this, right? So I knew that, I trust all of the rest of the team, that if the client likes something that I did on Photoshop, that someone in the team would be able to help me out with it. So it's really about that. Like at the time, I was like really just exploring, really just finding that style. And then once you kind of find that, then I had time to like, go in and adjust the lighting better, the shaders, all of those things. So if you go to like, explorations on collaboration, like a lot of those, like I had more time to do it because there's a bit already further from what I was already doing and planning. So it's very dependent where you are. And this style frame was like, again, it was almost like a sketch. Like really that style frame was almost like a sketch to start a conversation about these symbols.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you said something a couple of minutes ago too, as you were sort of describing your technical breakdown for this too, that, you were like, I didn't want to get too caught up in how I was going to technically execute this. If in fact, this was sort of the direction that, we were going to end up going, I kind of just, threw what I could in there to sort of visually communicate, get the idea across. And I think that that's such a great thing to sort of call out because, we have so many tools where we could get so into the weeds with some of the technical tools that we have at our disposal. And, you kind of feel like a kid in a candy shop sometimes where you're sort of like, oh, I found this idea and now I'm going to really, really fine tune it in this and that. But then what if the idea doesn't get picked up by the client? They're sort of like, yeah, this is nice, but what if we did a little bit, what if we went a little bit more in this direction? And, not that it's necessarily a letdown to the artist that then like spent all that time on it. But, I think it's just great that you're more or less saying like, I did what I needed to get the idea across. And, this would then either later inform even more of the idea or it would be the idea. And then we could then really hone in on, okay, well, how are we going to technically execute this? And so again, I think it's just speaking to the whole idea that you guys had a really good amount of time to figure out the how and the why of the story and how you were going to like visually execute it from start to finish. I just think it's really cool to hear the whole story, and technical components really complemented themselves on this project. And obviously you can see it in the final piece and even these style frames that didn't even make the cut, which is amazing. The fact that, this wasn't the actual iconography used for collaboration. So, just very cool to kind of hear that whole aspect of the project as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I said, I think it's like, for me, it's always been a blend between like what do I do on Photoshop and what comes out on 3D. I think some things is, easy sometimes to just do it in 3D and take a little bit more time. But I do remember at this time, like in my head, I wanted them to blend and I just couldn't get it straight out of 3D. I was like, no point in like trying to find it now because it's going to take me a while.
Right.
But yeah, like a lot of the stuff that I also do, like I remember doing a lot in Photoshop, and the times as well was when I used particles, because instead of doing a full system that would create like all this crazy stuff happening, I'll just do different systems and then just go on After Effects or Photoshop and just kind of layer them. And then I would always get to like, cool, can you like get this animated? I was like, there's like 5 to 10 different X particle setups. Maybe, yes, like they will animate and then you put them back again on top like I did. Maybe. But it's just, like, I guess it depends how technical or not you are. And I wouldn't say I'm a very technical person. Like I find things and I enjoy exploring Cine 4D and the tools. But for me, I think the biggest thing is the story and, like that idea of how it's going to look. And that's usually where I'm more focused on. And then the technicality will come with it. Like I will figure it out and I'll find something in the way, but I'm really more about the storytelling and like, how can we represent these things and how would they look in 3D?
Sure. No, for sure. Well, and it also sounds like, again, you explaining all of that, this was another example of, working smart, but also hard at the same time, but working smart in that, you're like, well, we'll figure it out. I've got the confidence in my team that, we can handle this, whatever you guys end up liking, we will get it done and it will look, we will have the finalized look match at the end. So again, this reoccurring theme of collaboration, it just kind of like reigns through the entire project, both, visually and, sort of in a teamwork collaboration sense. So, again, just very cool to kind of hear all of that coming together. Well, and because of all of that, it kind of sounds like I might know the answer to this question, but I always have to ask it, of the guests on the show, what about this frame, makes it your favorite frame?
I think it's the blend of being super minimal, like in the sense of like super graphical. I think the more, it's that idea of like the more details you add to it, the nicer it will look and the more realistic it would look. Obviously, this is not supposed to be realistic, this one. So there's direct connotation, like I'll add this texture, I'll add this lighting, I add this. And I remember at the time, this frame was like probably in Studio HDRI, just the light coming down and, like the Photoshop art. I really like that. Like I haven't done anything else like that. That's probably why I like this frame. I did it one time, asked me to do it again. I probably can't in Photoshop. It just happened. And as I was going back, I was like, oh, what should I show? And then, this just came to my mind. Like I really like how simple in a way it was, and at the same time complex with all those shadows. It just, for me, hits a really good balance. And it's a nod to my graphic design background, I think, as well.
Very cool. Yeah, no. Oh, that's awesome. Well, it's cool to hear that, this project, and this frame in particular, pushed you technically in some aspects, pushed you, in your creative direction sort of, path as in your career as well. So I can see why, this has been a favorite of yours and why you chose to share it today. And I'm so happy that you did, because it's a project that you've talked about in the past. I'm glad we were able to get into the weeds and the details of this, because it is a fantastic project. It's set the stage for many other Microsoft projects that have come up as well. So you guys really were some big trendsetters on this. So it's really cool to see where it started and where it's going today, for sure.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think as well, like as the last years I've been doing more creative direction, like I've slowly been less hands-on. That's why I was saying at the beginning that I like the freelance aspect, because then I can swap around. Like if I've done a lot of creative direction, I may then have something that is more just design focused. But like 6-7 years ago, where most of my days was just style frames, to now where I'm much more managing. Like I think it's also like a nice connotation to like remind myself of like how I started, and the whole evolution until what I'm doing today, and even the style that I have today.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. I love that. I think a lot of people would agree with you too, that like, you can kind of see an arc of your personal story come out in some of these projects too. That's definitely something that's, other guests have spoken about on the podcast as well. So I'm glad to hear that you fall in that camp too, because I can totally see it. Well, I mean, this has been great, Nidia. I can't thank you enough, for coming on the show today to chat and share this frame and this project with us. If people want to connect with you to learn more about what you're working on, what's the best way for them to do so?
Instagram, probably. I think nowadays probably everyone says the same, but I think Instagram will be where I do like the normal big projects / like quick experiments. So, once I still don't like to like get away too much from creating style frames. So I would always try to do like personal projects, and I'll add them on Instagram if I'm happy with them. There's a lot of stuff that I don't share. Yes.
Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to share your Instagram information, website, links to some of the resources and tools we've mentioned here for our audience to check out as well. But that wraps it up for today, everyone. Feel free to email us at styleframesatpod@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think of the show. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, if you like what you see and hear here, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and review the show on your favorite podcasting platforms as well. Lastly, come connect with us on social. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you again, Nidia, for joining us today, and we'll see you all in the next one.